It's Friday, the 22nd of September, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridlin and Sam Sethi.
Oh yes, I'm James Cridlin, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of Podfans.
In the chapters today, new Apple Podcasts in iOS 17 on iPhone and iPad. Acast slips in free music. Sony Music announces significant layoffs in their podcast division. Also, podcasts are continuing to go global on the YouTube Music app. Where did the $4 million owed to Cast Media's creators go? And Albi launches the Zap Planner. Plus...
Hey, it's Ross Adams, CEO of Acast, and I'll be on later to talk about our partnership with Podscribe.
Hey, it's Pete Birsinger, CEO of Podscribe, and I will be on later to talk about our partnership with Acast.
They will. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,084 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support. And now AI to help you publish your show with even more AI tools now available. And we're sponsored by Podnews Live in London next week, next Wednesday, the 27th of September. Tickets are available now at podnews.net/live.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
Okay, James, let's kick this show off. What's first up this week? Apple's added episode art. Come on, tell me what's new in iOS 17 with Apple Podcasts.
Yes, well, episode art, that's a new thing. Apple Podcasts has historically been the only podcast app not to support episode art properly. It supported it for, I think, enhanced AAC files or something. Anyway, it was a very complicated thing. It didn't support it for much else. It now supports it for everything, which is really nice. What it's doing in the new app, and I'm sure that you've all had a look at the new app. Why did I just say you've all? I've just broken all of the rules. And I'm sure that you've taken a look at the new app, but there's a little sort of overlay on there with the main logo of your podcast over the episode artwork and everything else. It all looks quite smart. Yes, so they're joining Spotify and Pocket Casts and other podcasting 2.0 apps like Fountain, Podfriends and Podfans. We do episode art. It looks fantastic in the Podnews Daily podcast, and it looks pretty good in the in this very podcast. Some of the text goes over the top of some of it, so at some point we'll redo that template. But still, have you taken a peek at it, Sam?
Yeah, I've been on the developer program from the beta, so I have seen it. And yeah, it's great that they've done it. I'm excited for this release, not because of actually episode art. I'm excited because iOS 17 has greater PWA support, much greater, so push notifications, home screen, buttons and everything else. I'm really excited for iOS 18 though, because that I guess will be when we get chapter art, JSON scripts and any form of comments and feedback. But anyway, we'll have to wait for that next year.
Well, yes, and I think that they do support ID3 chapter art, so that's chapter art which is actually within the file. That's not something that we do on this podcast. Buzzsprout doesn't support that, but it is something that other people do. And if you've got Hindenburg, you can shove in the chapter art directly in through that. And for many podcast hosts, that'll actually still stay there. But yes, it would be nice if they supported more of the chapter art. I'm possibly speaking out of turn. I still don't understand why Podcasting 2.0 redesigned chapters completely, but still, fine. That's a fine thing. But I think comments as well is a really interesting idea too.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be boosts, grams, and zaps. It can be just straight comments, which would have been nice. But I do love how some of the Podcasting 2.0 apps now, I think, have actually leapfrogged Apple and Spotify in functionality. I think they've gone beyond in terms of what the user would want. I think that it's been a catch-up game for over 2, maybe 3 years, but I think some of the apps have now gone beyond it, which is really cool.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They've. I think that some of the new apps are looking really good, but I have to say, the Apple Podcasts app is looking better than it ever has, which is really nice. We're up to Internet Explorer 12. So I think that it's done. No, I think seriously, it's a very smart thing. I have actually spent the time over the last couple of days tweaking the Podnews daily feed so that it shows very nicely in the Apple Podcasts app. It's not my number one app by any stretch, but nevertheless, it's worthwhile making sure that it looks a little bit nicer. So you will notice for that, the episode art is slightly changed. I've moved where the Podnews logo is on the episode art to the bottom right instead of the top right, so that you don't get two Podnews logos within Apple Podcasts. And there are a few other things that I'm doing just to sort of smarten it up a bit. But yeah, I think you know it's a worthwhile thing. There are other bits of Apple news, aren't there?
Yeah, Apple has put an Apple podcast studio in Cupertino.
Yes, it was a team of Spanish podcasters. What was the name of the Spanish podcasters, Sam?
Oh, thanks. Oh, leave that one to me. Las Charras del Apples. Yeah,
you see, and you see what I did there on the Podnews daily podcast yesterday. As I said, a Spanish podcaster. Yes, so a team recorded in what they called the Apple Podcast Studio in Apple Park in Cupertino, directly after Apple's Wonderlust event last week, and it looked very, very smart. They described it in a blog post as a generously sized recording room that includes everything any podcaster needs to produce quality content. And I now hear that it isn't a generously sized recording room at all. It's a generously sized room, which they use for a lot of different things. And sometimes they put some podcast recording equipment in it. So it's not actually a podcast studio at all. It's just a fancy room. But it's nice that this team really, really enjoyed it anyway. I tell you what, Sam, I mean, you know, regardless of whether or not it's a permanent studio or a temporary studio, I mean, this show would sound great from there, wouldn't it?
I think it would. And, you know, obviously I'd love a little tour of the Apple spaceship. That would be nice. Meet the Men in Black. I've never met the Men in Black.
So maybe we can go and have a look around the entirely enclosed ecosystem that the Apple Park is. And I feel that invitation slipping away.
Yeah, I think it went when I called it IE7.
Right, let's move on to story number 2, which is Acast.
Yeah, Acast have announced a partnership with something called Slip.Stream, which is offering all Acast podcasters access to more than 70,000 royalty-free music tracks. So it allows Acast creators to get free access for 6 months, which sounds very good, James. A little bit of music to play. And again, if it's free, what's to worry about?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, it's a smart thing. It's just a free trial, but they've managed to negotiate quite a decent free trial. So I think that's quite an interesting thing. It does show that some podcasters really want music in their shows, and this is perhaps a way of doing that. Of course, you won't probably have heard of any of the 70,000 tracks or songs that you can actually choose from, but nevertheless, they are there, but they are royalty-free, and I think royalty-free in eternity. So if you are using them, then you know you can use them for forever. But obviously, you get free access for the first 6 months into the directory, and then after that, you have to pay a little bit. But I think that's a good thing. But Acast has also been doing, and of course, Lizzie Pollett, LP from Acast, is speaking at Podnews Live next week. Acast's also been doing all kinds of other things, haven't they?
Back in August, Acast also sent you a press release saying that from the 1st of September, they'll no longer accept campaigns that use Spotify's ad analytics. They also said that Acast will offer attribution from independent analytics companies, namely Podscribe, for free to all advertisers. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? So, James, I thought I'd reach out to Ross Adams, the CEO of Acast, and the CEO of Podscribe, Peter Birsinger, and find out what the relationship and partnership was all about, and why Acast wasn't going to be using Spotify's ad analytics anymore. Why don't we start off with who or what is Podscribe?
Got it. Yeah, I would say we at Podscribe are a tool to help buyers scale their advertising, and similarly for publishers to help scale their sales. And under that, we have a couple key components, but the two most prominent are verification and attribution. So helping buyers and sellers make sure the buys are running as they expect, and then how did they perform? So those are our two biggest focuses, and we we've been doing the verification piece, I would say, longer, and that is probably how a lot of our strongest relationships have been formed. But I think that's really built the foundation for the attribution side of things.
And the underlying technology you're using is AI, or partly AI and partly human?
Yeah, you could say there's a mix of man and machine in there. So yeah, it depends kind of which part of it we're talking about. But yeah, we do, for instance, for the verification side of things, where we find the advertisers' ads in the podcasts, that is a mix of man and machine, because sometimes the transcript is imperfect. It can be hard to tell the exact word an ad starts and ends. So we've got it pretty close to fully AI, but there is a level of human review in there. So that's just kind of one example, but that's how a lot of our tools are with a mix.
Ross, hello, how are you?
Hey, Sam, you all right?
Yeah, very well. Now, look, August the 17th, we get a press release that says Acast has announced that from September the 1st, it will no longer accept new campaigns that use Spotify's ad analytics. And right at the bottom of that, it said, we will offer attribution from independent analytic companies like Podscribe free for all advertisers. So that piqued my interest. But let's start off with, why have you decided as of 1st of September no longer to accept campaigns that use Spotify's ad analytics?
This isn't a knee-jerk decision from an Acast. This is something we've been working on for quite a while. We work with thousands and hundreds of advertisers and agencies daily across the globe. And through data, we make informed decisions. And this is something that has been spoken to us about by different brands, especially when Podsights and Chartable got bought across over to Spotify, now Spotify Analytics. We champion the open ecosystem. Acast believes clearly in independence, and kind of objectivity. We believe that's crucial, basically, for advertisers and the industry when it comes to the likes of measurement. And for us to maintain impartiality, we've always worked with trusted third-party partners for measuring and reporting on campaigns. Obviously, advertising is our bread and butter. And so relying solely on a one publisher environment for data aggregation, we believe can introduce biases and self-promotion, and that kind of hinders the object analysis of data across all types of the supply. So Podscribe, is also worth noting, doesn't sell media. Spotify does. So again, this is kind of what's made the decision there.
Does this mean, though, that you might eventually, look, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but would you eventually acquire Podscribe? I mean, is the market to be an M&A, or is it just to be a partner?
For us as a partner, we also partner with kind of many of the other attribution sites, from Claritas, Arts AI, Magellan, Veritonic. But I think, the deep partnership with Podscribe highlights, the differences Podscribe has with any of the others in the marketplace. We want to offer our advertisers and agencies the best tools we can, which is why we've done this partnership with Podscribe.
Peter, so when you got the call from Acast, that must have been a great, exciting moment for you, growing company as you are. What do you think you bring to the party, though? What's the thing that Podscribe, more than any other, will help with Acast customers?
I think, first off, I think kudos to Acast, because I don't think it was an easy move to take a stand like that. And in a lot of conversations with other publishers following the Podsights acquisition, I think it's a thing that most, if not all of them, were thinking. So I think definitely kudos to Acast, not only, of course, for picking us, that's great, but I think also taking the stand on independence, because I don't think it's necessarily an easy thing to do when some advertisers may still press them for it. So and I think it sort of sets a tone for the space to make it easier for others to follow suit. So that's the first thing. But in terms of what we bring, I think historically our client base is largely advertisers. So I think we, in advertisers from the beginning, have a trust of our verification and results. So I think it is And there have been times when, for certain publishers, even Acast, sometimes will say, oh, this ad, had this issue or that issue, even while we were talking about the partnership. So I think I don't think it's necessarily, or I think it's recognized by the industry that maybe, if anything, we're too much on the side of the buyers to provide independent, impartial reporting, not only for did my campaign run to get what I paid for, but also how did it perform. So I think there is a strong understanding, at least in circles of the industry, that we can provide that. So we're thrilled about the partnership and looking forward to growing it further.
So, Ross, we were happy to interview recently Greg Glenday, who's just joined you as your global business director. So what's you up to? It's one of those questions. When I looked at what Glenn was doing, he's getting product reporting to him, strategy reporting to him. I was like, hey, Ross is off on sabbatical. What's Ross doing?
Yeah, no, I think, product still reports to me. So from Greg's side, Greg's been brought in to look after kind of that commercial and revenue side, as well as the content side, and how do we kind of sew that more together. Also, US is such a huge market. If we look at the kind of, you compare the likes of maybe the second biggest market, UK, out there, and what's the UK worth? About £70 million in terms of commercial value, whereas you look at the US podcast market, it's worth $2 billion last year. So the opportunity is definitely in the States. US clearly is obviously a local business, so we need local talent who understand the industry here. And part of the role that I've played in moving over to New York is to expand and move forward the Acast business alongside Greg. So Greg's here to help accelerate that for us. We also got, the likes of BizDev as a department as well that falls under Greg. So there's, at Acast, we wear many hats. We're not a huge organization per se when you compare us to kind of some of the larger brands out there. But, Greg's very much going to help us accelerate our business here in the US.
Brilliant. And again, congratulations on the promotion for Lizzie. She's done well.
Yes. Thank you, Sam, for that. That was all you, mate. I'll give it to
completely.
you. Completely.
I'd love to take credit for nothing there. Absolutely nothing. But thank you very much. Just one other story that came out last week. You've done an announcement with Slipstream. What's that one about?
Yeah, so Slipstream, what it does is, anyone who is hosted with Acast as an Acast customer, it allows you to use that service for free for 6 months, and it gives you access to 70,000 song and music beds to use within your podcast, which give you the rights to be able to use them, basically. So it helps promote that service, but it helps promote another service to our creators to make better content for the ecosystem.
Cool. Look, I won't take up much more of your time. This deal sounds interesting. It's gone live now. 1st of September has passed, so this is now active. What's the uptake been like?
I mean, from our side, we deal with thousands and thousands of customers. So I think it's landed very well, this deal. And, a lot of customers already use Podscribe anyway. So this just kind of excels the partnership and brings new measurement to new advertisers.
Peter, thank you very much. Glad to meet you. Ross, as ever, good to see you again, my friend, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Sam. Cheers.
Ross and Peter from Acast and from Podscribe. And great to hear from both of those. And of course, Lizzie Pollett is speaking at Podnews Live next Wednesday, along with a bunch of other people. There's also been other movement in the whole brand safety, contextual targeting, analytics, and all of that kind of stuff going on. AdLarge, Flightpath, and Sounder announcing an integration to offer a mega package to their customers. And NPR, who've renewed a brand lift measurement solution with Veritonic as well.
So, James, moving on then. Sony, now this is not good news. Sony's announced significant layoffs in their podcast division. What's been happening?
Well, yes, Sony haven't announced them, but they have sort of come out through a couple of leaked emails and everything else. And all we really know so far, and Ashley Carman has done a very good job of doing, of reporting on this. All that we really know so far is that there is a very large, seemingly, amount of people who are being made redundant from Sony Music podcasts. So the piece talks about a significant percentage of the division. According to a Sony spokesperson that Ashley spoke to, the company wasn't more specific, she says, which is worthwhile spotting. So I'm not quite sure how many people are going. They're also getting rid of a podcast as well, High Low, with Emily Ratajkowski. How do I pronounce that? Ratajkowski. She's a model and author, Sam, and I bet you know her. So how do I pronounce her surname?
Ratajkowski.
Oh, there you go. Yes, well, anyway, they do a podcast with her and they're getting rid of it. And this is brilliant. This is US myopia encapsulated in one sentence. The program attracted a large segment of listeners internationally, but struggled to sell advertising because brands primarily wanted to reach US consumers. So brilliant. Apparently, no one outside of the US buys anything, Sam. We don't buy a thing. That's fine.
Good.
We don't need any advertising. It's pointless advertising to us. And the fact that they have people tuning into that program from other parts of the world, obviously there's no way of making money out of that at all. It's impossible. So just so myopic. But anyway, there you go. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about what is going on when they actually say something, and that would be nice to know.
Well, maybe they can't say anything because they're advertising for an account director to do global podcasting, and they're going to be based in London. So maybe that's why they can't say anything. Whoever that new person is, maybe the spokesperson in the future. Well,
yes. I mean, maybe that is the case. Yes, podnews.net/jobs actually has that particular job, which is currently available. So you do kind of ask yourself, well, what's going on there then? But I'm sure that there's a plan. It's just that we don't necessarily know what that plan is.
Talking of companies that don't tell you what their plans are, it looks like podcasts are growing globally on YouTube. What's happening, James?
Well, yes. So I was tipped off that if I searched for a podcast here in Australia, then I would find it. And in fact, it's not just here in Australia. I got the VPN out, Sam. So far, I've found podcasts are now in the YouTube Music app in Australia, New Zealand, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Korea, Singapore, and Thailand, and probably quite a lot of other countries as well. Not Hong Kong, nowhere in Europe. Not South Africa, but in quite a lot of other places. So, so that is interesting. They're only available at the moment if you search for them, so they don't appear otherwise in the UX, but I guess it's the first step in making podcasts available everywhere in that app. And of course, I'm using the word podcast with inverted commas because they're nothing to do with RSS feeds.
Now, talking of RSS and podcasting not being the same thing on YouTube, I saw this announcement. It was in, obviously, Pod News Daily. You had one of the Pod News readers, Katie, send you a picture from the London Underground of Audible's new podcast series with Steve Coogan from the Oat House. And I thought, hang on a minute, okay, that's great. So I'll go and find the RSS and I'll ingest that. So I went to Podcast Index, typed it out. Nope, nothing there. Went to Audible. Nope. So again, why are they allowed to call it a podcast when it has no RSS feed? It's the same as YouTube, but we never give Audible, aka Amazon, any hard time in the same way we do YouTube, I suppose.
No, and I think that's an absolutely fair enough comment. So this is the season 3 of Steve Coogan's podcast from the Oat House, which is a building in southern England designed to dry hops, the chief ingredient of beer. Yes, and we never really pick them up for calling it a podcast. It isn't a podcast. It's just a piece of audio that you can pick up within the Audible app, and that is it. At some point, it might be released everywhere else. It took, I think, think, 4 years for West Cork, which was an Audible exclusive to be released everywhere else. But it's a great podcast if you want to go and have a listen to that one. We should be a little bit stronger in terms of that. I have to say, Podnews doesn't cover new shows ordinarily from Audible because we can't link to them, because we can't, do anything with them. We can't get the artwork or anything else. I think, asked the PR people who I talked to 5 times now, please could you put me in touch with somebody at Audible where I can actually get some form of API into your directory? And that has never gone any further than I'll see what I can do. So yes, so it's a bit of a strange one. But yes, I don't normally cover these things. It was in there because it was a photograph that Katie, who's on holiday from Canada, had taken on the tube in London of an advert for this particular show. And there is a little feature in the Podnews newsletter, which is podcast promotion in the wild. Given that 58% of people don't listen to podcasts in the US, it's probably a good idea that we don't just advertise podcasts on podcasts, and we actually advertise them elsewhere as well. And so that's kind of the point of that.
Now, in my best Tom Cruise impersonation, James, show me the money. That's really bad, actually.
That's really bad.
But I'd like to know where $4 million went to. So, James, tell me why Cast Media's $4 million has gone walkabout.
Yes, that was quite a thing, wasn't it? Yes, there's quite a lot of money seems to have gone missing from Cast Media. Now, of course, we have covered this in the past in terms of that, but... there was a really interesting and really good piece of reporting that was put together by a man called CoffeeZilla, who put together a really good video which was explaining what had gone on with Cast Media and where all of the money went. He spoke to Dustin Knaus, who is somebody who actually worked for the company a while ago, and Dustin had his own theory for where the money was going.
I would say that honestly, most of the money probably went to the minimum guarantees of other talent instead of to the people that it was supposed to go to.
So basically, he's saying that there was lots of minimum guarantees, and they just were given out to other people, and basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that sort of thing. But then he did a little bit more digging around Colin Thompson, and Colin Thompson essentially managed to sell his house to a trust. Which is a very strange thing. Why would you do that, said CoffeeZilla? Why would you do that if you knew that you were going bankrupt?
Right about the time he was talking about declaring bankruptcy, he moved that house into a trust where the trustee was a Wyoming LLC he set up, which from where I stood looked a lot like hiding assets from a bankruptcy right before a bankruptcy.
It's a really good piece of reporting. It's well worth a look at. You'll find it on YouTube, of course, and lots of people have ended up seeing that. So that was quite a thing.
Yeah, moving your assets out isn't a very good sign of you trying to do the right thing. Anyway, I'll leave that with the law courts in America, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed. And from what I know, I am aware of at least another podcast network who's done exactly the same thing, and is currently unable to pay their creators on time. My difficulty is that I don't have enough contacts to be able to back that story up and to make the allegation. And then, of course, we have reported on Odyssey both cancelling their minimum guarantee with APM and Tenderfoot TV's agreement with Cadence 13, which is owned by Odyssey, where Tenderfoot TV claim that they haven't been paid by Odyssey and claim that Odyssey have basically scrunched up their minimum guarantee contracts as well. So this is not a one-off thing. It's not just Colin Thompson being a dreadful man, if indeed he is. It's rather more than that. And so I suspect that we're going to find out a little bit more about this in the future.
Now, moving on, James, around the world, let's have a little look. In Canada, Triton Digital unveiled its Canada Podcast Trends Report. What was the outcome?
Yes, they ended up saying that Canadians are listening to lots of podcasts, 3 hours of podcasts on average per week. Always good to see total time spent listened figures coming out of this kind of thing. More, please. 3 hours of podcasts on average per week is nice. Imagine if we were able to bump that up to 4, that would mean potentially 25% more revenue into podcasts. If you're charging your podcasts out by cost per thousand, because you can fit 25% more ads in. So that would be a good thing. They also found out that true crime is the most popular category, of course, in Canada. I think the number one podcast there is NBC's Dateline, which is essentially a true crime show. So that's a good thing. And there was data around podcasting in Kenya from Spotify, or Kenya, if you prefer it better that way, if you're as old as my dad is. And that ranks podcasts by total hours of listening again, rather than total audience. And of course, Spotify knows exactly to the second how long people are listening to a podcast. So the number one show, well, now, as I look at it right now, all of the numbers have been taken out of the release that I linked to. So it did have full numbers in terms of, thousands of listening for the number one show, which is It's Related, I Promise. And it actually published all of those numbers in there, and all of a sudden, all of those numbers have disappeared. So maybe Spotify has gone, what on earth are you doing publishing those numbers that we gave you, which is what they've done to me in the past. So find out what's going on there. That'll be a trip to the archive later. But there we go.
And back in your hometown, it says that Monolith is an Australian horror film about podcasting, which has got a cinematic release on the October the 26th. So I assume you're going to go and see that film then, James.
Too bloody right, mate. No, I'm not going to go and see that. But yes, an Australian horror film about podcasting. It was premiered at the Adelaide Film Festival last year and was at South by Southwest earlier this year as well. So a horror film about podcasting. Presumably it's got some really bad edits in it, and it's got a little clip of Joe Rogan. I'm imagining that's the horror there. What do you think?
That would be about right. Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think so. And then finally, Edison Research is releasing the Latino Podcast Listener Report 2023 on October the 5th. It's an excellent piece of reportage, an excellent piece of data. So looking forward to hearing from that as well. Let's take a look at some jobs. And Audiohook has announced David Krulwich, or DK to his friends, as the company's chief revenue officer. Presumably he's taken the idea of calling himself initials after LP from Acast. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
Amy Westervelt, the founder of the Critical Frequency Podcast Network, has received a fancy Journalist of the Year award from Covering Climate Now, which is a journalism collaboration. Nielsen has a new CEO, but there again, they've just been making tons of people redundant. How do I pronounce his name, Sam? Is it Karthik or Kartik?
Oh, I'm going to go with Karthik. Yes.
Karthik Rao, who has replaced David Kenny, who becomes executive chairman. So worthwhile keeping an eye on that. I put in slightly sarcastically that the company was purchased by private equity last year and has since had 2 rounds of redundancy. Because that's what private equity does, doesn't it?
That's
basically how that works.
Tighten the ship, cut the costs.
Yes, indeed. So there's a bunch of all of that stuff going on. And if you're looking for a job, Podnews has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world on podcasting's largest jobs board, except no substitute. They're free to post as well. It'll just take 2 minutes to add a new role at podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk, the Podcasting 2.0 Music Top 100. That was an excellent thing. It now updates hourly. There's also different feeds of that via OPML and via a remote item RSS playlist.
So, James, it sounds very exciting that it's done this, the remote item RSS playlist. And now I'm going to ask you, what is a remote item RSS playlist?
Well, yes, because there are two in the world. There's this one, and there's the one that Podnews runs. The new Podcast Trailers podcast is also available as a remote item RSS playlist. What it's basically saying is instead of downloading the audio and uploading it to your own podcast host, and then that's bad because you're essentially copying other people's work, just link to that individual item directly. So there is this thing called a remote item, and very few podcast apps actually understand it so far. But the technology behind the remote item is also the technology behind wallet switching technology, which is how music gets paid for in music value for value podcasts. So it's a really helpful piece of tech which actually exists there. But yes, I would imagine that not very many people are using it right now. The good thing, though, is that it contains all of the data, all of the information that you need to do a music show for yourself, because it's got all of the right numbers and IDs and everything else. So as I learned not so long ago.
Now, the reason why I'm putting my app hat on here, so...
That's a nice hat, Sam.
Thank you very much, yes. It doesn't quite fit yet, but I'm trying. The pod roll was one of the things we did a few months back. It came out, and that was the idea of a podcast creator being able to say, right, using the remote item feed, I can say this podcast, and this podcast are three that I recommend, and I can add that to my RSS feed. And many of the Podcasting 2.0 apps began to support that. And I know where to place that. That's James has got a pod roll, and so we can share all of his episodes in one tab and his pod roll in another tab. But when I looked at this playlist that you've got, I was like, where do I present that? How do I present that? Because it's a series of, I suppose, remote episodes. So am I now supposed to put the pod roll and your playlists in your podcast page because it's you who's created it? We support user-generated playlists, and they go in the user's profile, which is the logical place. So is this a creator's playlist?
Yeah, it's kind of that. It's really instead of. The new Podcast Trailers podcast is a good case in point. In that, if you look at the standard RSS for that, then you will see a lot of things that look as if they are audio files on my server. Now, in fact, they're not, because I'm redirecting them, but they look as if they're audio files on my server. That's a bad thing if you want to properly link, including all of the payment information and the chapter information and everything else. If you just want to link to someone else's show or someone else's episode. And so what the remote item RSS playlist basically says is, okay, go and have a look at this RSS feed and use this episode from it. So you're actually getting, it's a bookmark, it's a shortcut, if you like, or an alias, I guess, if you like. So you're getting a direct link to that episode. And if the creator then wants to edit the audio or perhaps delete it or whatever, it will automatically get taken away from everywhere else as well. So it's kind of a bit like shortcuts. But if you were going to show that remote item RSS playlist, it would just look like a normal podcast in Podfans. It would be just a list of episodes, and those episodes happen to be coming from somebody else's RSS feeds.
The thing that we're doing is we already support playlists. We're now going to allow you to export them as a remote item playlist. So that's what we'll do. We're going to have to test whether we can import remote item playlists and then present them in the right manner. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, indeed. And it comes back to the conversation that we were having 2 or 3 weeks ago around Podfans saying that you're supporting version 2.06 of the RSS of podcasting RSS, and actually, is it worth your while to sit and support remote item RSS playlists when there are 2 in the world, and where, frankly, there is no benefit in you supporting them right now.
No.
There is absolutely no point in you supporting it for the new podcast trailers. The only reason that there is a remote item RSS playlist there is because I could make one, quite literally. So there's no point in supporting it there, and arguably there's no point in supporting it really in the Music Top 100 either.
No, but I do think there is a point where we have playlists that we let users within our own pod fans sort of click on episodes and then name them and save them into their profile. But actually on the share out, we're just doing a link to that page. But actually on the share out, we could do a remote item playlist. And then, of course, that's in a standard structure. The question is then, will anyone ever use that file? I mean, it'll be a case of other podcast apps being able to ingest it. I guess you've got to start somewhere. But what was confusing me was when you did it as a creator, where would I stick that as a podcast? Yeah. That's what was confusing me. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think it would just come up as a podcast, the same as any other podcast. That's the way that I would personally do it. But yes, and I get, because it was interesting actually using the remote item RSS playlist of the top 100, because that had all of the information that I needed to be able to put together another random show thing, another random music show thing. So I did the top 10 countdown for the top 10 last week, and rather enjoyed doing it. My microphone sounds awful. I need to work out how to make the microphone sound better, but accepting that, that was great fun to do, and much, much easier the second time to put together, because I learned two things. I learned, firstly, the OPML contains all of the information that I need for linking through to the individual tracks to make sure that everybody gets paid. And then secondly, Hindenburg, which is my audio editor, has a thing called a music report, which I've never seen in the past. But the music report essentially outputs a very dumb looking text file, which shows you which music tracks you played, when you started, and how long they were, which is exactly the information that is required in the RSS feed. So actually, it made life an awful lot easier putting that RSS feed together. The only one thing that I would say is I haven't bothered with chapters, because chapters is hard. And that does mean that certainly on Fountain, there's no artwork. And I'm kind of sitting there and going, surely the artwork should be, I mean, if you're playing a remote item and there's no chapter going on, then surely the artwork should automatically come from that remote item, you would have thought, wouldn't you? But maybe that's not correct.
Well, I'm looking at it because I did look at your show, and yeah, there is no chapter artwork in there. And that's, although basically it's going back to what we said right at the beginning with Apple. It's fundamentally episode artwork, and then going down that one layer to chapter artwork. But if there's no information in there as to how to get that specific data, then we can't display it either. Yeah,
but there again, of course, you've got all of that information because you've got the remote item, which links through to all of the information of that particular track. So maybe there is a way of doing this so that you don't need to, if there aren't any chapters, then actually it just pulls that information from the remote items anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe there's a plan. Anyway, that was exciting, wasn't it?
Was for me. Don't know about you, but was for me.
There are a couple of other things going on in the world of platforms. Castos is now offering free podcast transcripts for all shows. There is a but there, and the but is that they're not yet supporting the Podcasting 2.0 transcript tag. So they're offering free podcast transcripts, but they'll just appear within Castos, which is an opportunity particularly great, but Craig tells me that he is going to be adding it as a feature in the next couple of weeks. Blueberry is doing something which is very cool. So they have a product which is called Podcast Mirror, which is a RSS feed mirroring platform. So a bit like FeedBurner, if you remember that, you used to use that to mirror your blog RSS feed. And in the same way, this is exactly the same sort of thing, but for podcasts. But what Todd and the Blueberry team have added is support, at least at the channel level, for many different podcasting 2.0 features. So everything from, value for value payments, the host tag, all kinds of other, pod ping, all of that will work. So a whole host of other ideas in there. So if you are hosting with somebody that doesn't support the new podcasting namespace, then Podcast Mirror is your savior, because Podcast Mirror can essentially layer on all of those particular features for you. So if you're with Megaphone or somebody, cool, just use Podcast Mirror, point people to that version of your RSS feed, and hey presto, you can get all of the new podcasting 2.0 goodness. So that's a very cool, quite niche, but very cool thing that Todd and the Blueberry team have put together. So quite a smart thing, I think.
Yeah, I was reading about all of that yesterday, and it reminds me of sovereign feeds, basically, where, Stephen Bell, you can go in and take an RSS feed and then enhance it and then save it and then export it out. So it looks like, Podcast Mirror is exactly the same thing, but on a more commercial basis.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very good, very smart thing. And finally, Alitu has jumped on the AI bandwagon, has launched a thing called the Alitu Show Planner, which auto-generates an entire podcast action plan for free. It has a podcast name generator and an auto-generated script for the show's initial trailer. So if you lack any of the talent required to put a podcast together, then hooray! Now you can just follow what the AI tells you to do. And that's a wonderful thing. Colin does some really good tools at Alitu. Not necessarily convinced about this one, but nevertheless, it's a good thing to see him try new things.
Now, Rode, you use Shure, don't you, for your mic, and I use Rode. But they've said that the new Mac OS Sonoma, which went live yesterday, they've said do not upgrade if you're using an Intel Mac. So thankfully I'm not. I'm on an M1. So yes.
Oh, only an M1.
Hey, I'm not moneybags like you.
Yes. So it actually comes out on Tuesday, September the 26th. So the day before Podnews Live. I wouldn't necessarily install it then. But yes, if you're running an Intel Mac, then Rode is saying don't upgrade. And in fact, it's not just Rode products. It's basically quite a lot of other products as well, where apparently they've messed something up. Rode have told Apple time and time again that there's a problem here, and Apple haven't necessarily fixed it. So that is going to catch an awful lot of people out. So I have deliberately not gone anywhere near the new macOS, and we'll be waiting until at least until I'm home again from the UK to upgrade. But yeah, that's a concern. Not quite sure what happens. Whether or not it works at all is one thing. It seems to be something to do with the USB connection, so don't fully understand that. But yeah, that's going to catch an awful lot of people out if we're not careful.
Yeah, well, I am using a Sonoma. I'm on the beta, the final beta, and I am using a Rodecaster Pro 2. So happy days, both work.
Yes. Oh, well, that's a good thing. So, yes, as long as it works, then that's all that matters.
James, now you came up with something really interesting. You came up with this simple, straightforward way to promote your podcast by embedding your audio in an email, which I thought was quite fascinating. So tell me more. What is it and why? How did you find it?
Well, so it turns out that 58% of people, astonishingly, use Apple Mail to open emails, either Apple Mail on iPhones, on iPad, or on desktop. Or they're using something which is using Apple's WebKit under the hood. So I use a great mail program called MimeStream, which is brilliant, which integrates perfectly with Gmail. And so all of these people are all using Apple Mail in some way, shape, or form. Now, Apple Mail is interesting because it supports, and by the way, no one else does, but it supports the audio tag. So the standard audio HTML tag in email, so you can basically embed an audio tag in your HTML email. It'll give you a little player within your email that appears if it's supported, and you can press the play button and it goes off and downloads your podcast and plays it back to you as if it was a normal podcast app. So a really easy, straightforward way of getting people to hear a podcast that you have shown off. So I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I was to give that a test, send it out to the 29,300 people that get the Pod News daily newsletter every single day, and see whether or not the bots go crazy, whether or not it does anything for our deliverability, etc., etc., and everything just works perfectly. So yeah, it's a really good way if you want to promote your show. Maybe you've already got a newsletter, maybe you've already got something else. Then embed that HTML audio tag. If it works, you'll see a play button, and if you hit that play button, it will appear in your podcast analytics as a normal download, because it's a normal download, and you can even keep listening to it as you go through the rest of your email. It won't actually stop until you go and stop it directly. So it's a really good way of sharing audio from the podcast that you actually have. Works with DAI and everything else. So yes, really interesting. There's a full report on that at the Pod News newsletter. podnews.net/articles is where to find that.
There was, I thought it was really interesting, only on the basis that I can imagine someone using sound bites and then being able to put that soundbite in the email. Would you recommend, though, putting your full podcast? I mean, I suppose you could, because you just said it would count as a play. But we had Brian of London saying, well, how are you going to get your micropayments to that? And I said, well, I don't know. So probably just put sound bites or clips would be the only thing I'd do.
Yes, or indeed, if you were wanting to promote a new season or something, maybe you might put a trailer in there. So there's all kinds of different things. So my theory is, when I'm brave enough to do the coding, my theory is the bit at the bottom of the Pod News newsletter where it has all of the new shows which are now available for you to go and have a listen to. My theory is to put a play button next to all of those so that you can actually have a listen if you want to. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, and I reckon I can do that in a way that pressing the play button will actually appear as a play on the original podcast's analytics. So that would be quite a nice thing if it's possible to end up doing. So so I think that there's an awful lot of interesting things. I think Todd Cochran's Blueberry runs a thing called Subscribe by Email, where you can actually subscribe to a podcast via email if you want, to get an email when a new episode comes out. So again, what he could do there is he could actually embed the audio, directly into the email. It's it's 2 lines of code. It's really, really easy. So there's all kinds of things you could do with that.
Nice. Like it. Good find, James. Good find.
2 other things just to round up the tech stuff. OpenAI's Whisper, which is the speech recognition software, there's a new update of that, the first update for a while. That includes improvements to word timestamp accuracy. So it's particularly good if you're doing those fancy JSON, karaoke style things. I know it's not properly karaoke, but you know what I mean. So you can download that. Now, the good news is that it also better supports the podcast namespace as well in there as well. So there's all kinds of of things that you can add to the command line to make it spit out the correct versions of that. If you want to see what the output of that looks like, then you will find that in the Podnews Daily podcast, which uses Whisper as its speech recognition in there. So that is nice. And Podpage has released Podpage Elite, which is a premium subscription for creators, which offers all kinds of entertaining things, including episode deep linking, link tracking, SEO analysis and stuff like that. If you are producing a podcast and you don't have the time or the skills to produce a website for it, then Podpage is a smart thing to go and use. Podpage.co/ no, it's not. It's podpage.com/podnews will, I think, get you a special deal. I think, if my memory serves that right. Anyway, podpage.com/podnews, I think, is where to go for that. But it's a very cool thing. Brendan, who puts the thing together, is a very bright chap. Also understands an awful lot about crypto and NFTs. So one would assume that at some point there might be a bit of Albi integration. He'd be mad not to, I don't think.
He would be. If you understand it, get ahead of the curve. That's all I'd say. Anyway. Events, James, what's coming up?
Well, of course, it's International Podcast Day on September the 30th. I've been involved in a few articles which are coming out on that date on different websites and stuff. It is, of course, Podnews Live next Wednesday in London in West 12. Podnews.net/live is where to get tickets and stuff. That seems to be going quite swimmingly, Sam, so far as I can see.
No, it's going really well. And I am sending out all of the agendas to the speakers and bits and pieces. And yeah, the numbers of people that are there are great. I think it'll be a really good event. We're going to go for drinks afterwards, and our friends at Acast have said they're going to sponsor those drinks. So drink up is all I'd say. And the night before, James, we might even have a little drink ourselves. So there you go.
Yes, that would be nice. I will treat you to a hoppy excitement. And a beer as well. The British Podcaster was, of course, the day after, which will be a marvellous event. The International Journalism Federation is having a conference in Athens on the Friday where I'm speaking. I have no idea what I'm speaking about, but I have a call, I think, later on today, so I can find out a little bit more about what it is that I'm supposed to be talking about. I think so far I've seen that I'm one of 3 people, and they're basically saying the bottom has fallen out of podcasting. It's all going to hell in a handbasket, and what on earth are you doing still involved in podcasting? So I think I will be arguing from the other side as well. But there are more events, both paid for and free, at Podnews, virtual events or events in a place with people. And if you are organising something, tell the world about it. It's free to be listed. Podnews.net/events.
Boostergram
Corner
on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Oh, yes, it's our favourite time of the week, Boostergram Corner. If you have a podcast app that has a boost button, press it. See what happens. Go on. Put a large number in and work out what's going on there. Sam, what have we got?
Well, Gene Bean sent us a row of ducks, 2222, and he said, I think something is wrong with your chapter art. I don't see Sam's graphs or any others. I haven't seen any art in the couple of shows, actually. I also checked in Podverse. Okay, hand up, Gene. It was my birthday, and I am trying to get Podfans out, so...
Slacker.
Yeah, exactly. It was down to me. No, it wasn't a technical problem.
You had one job, Seti. Apart from, organising Podnews Live.
Yes, and trying to get this Podfans out, and nothing else,
yes.
and trying to entertain myself for a birthday, because no one else was going to do it for me. Right, and all of that meant, yes, sorry, Gene, but I did update it. So then I got another row of ducks from him, 2222, saying, not sure what changed, but both apps have chapter art in now. So phew, I actually got my job done, James.
Well, there you go. That's a nice thing. Dave Jones sent us 5150 sats, and he says, whoa, Sam ends the show with a sick burn on James. What was that about? I've completely forgotten that.
Well, you said you weren't a proper journalist, and then at the end of the show, you said something, and I said, "Yeah, you see, you're not a proper journalist."
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes.
But then again, nor am I, so it's okay.
Yes,
It's fine.
Yes, and Dave also pointing out that there is a JSON, OPML, and RSS format version of the top 100 chart data. Thank you, Dave. You see, this is how you get feature requests into the podcast index. You just mentioned it on the show. And again, you get that done. Silas on Linux should be coming to the Podnews Live get together, but he can't. He says, really annoyed that I'm in London now until the 17th. Oh, and I don't have any more vacation days at work. Normally, I listen from Germany. Cheers, Silas. Well, cheers, Silas. I hope you've been enjoying some good British beer with all of the additives that are illegal in Germany. So I hope that you've been, enjoying that anyway.
And then Mere Mortals, our friend Karen, sent us another row of ducks, 222, seems to be the flavour this week. He said, did you end up going to the Brizzy podcast meetup, James? I think that's aimed at you. Ridgy-digi, I would say, means authentic, whereas fair dinkum is more of an expression to be used for Miles' surprise. There will be translation with this episode. Australian is an option if you want it.
Now, Karen, I think you're wrong. I think Ridgy-dig is straight and above board, and I think fair dinkum is similarly straight and above board, but a bit less so.
Why didn't you both talk the Queen's English and stop making up words? It would be easier.
Yeah, but anyway, I didn't end up going to the Brisbane podcast meetup because the Brisbane podcast meetup wanted $25 to go. And I was there thinking, I'm not sure that that's for me, so I didn't end up going. But I did end up listening to Karen doing his show live because Fountain told me that his Value for Value show was live, and that happened to be at 10 in the morning on Wednesday, and so therefore I had to listen to it, and it was rather fun having listened to it live. He does an awful lot of singing. Prior to him actually going live, he's there going, it's very, very strange, but still, there you go.
Did he watch the Swedish Muppets? Did he when he was growing up?
Too soon. If you get value from what we do, the Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything from it. It goes into paying for things like Podnews Live, frankly. We really appreciate your support, though, that we can continue making this show. You can become a power supporter with your Visa or MasterCard or your American Express or your weird Chinese one with the funny colours on it. Weekly.podnews.net is the place to go. Weekly.podnews.net with that, or you can support us with sats by hitting the boost button or indeed just streaming, as quite a lot of the money comes from. If you don't have one, podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new app. So there was a mystery person at the door about half an hour ago, Sam, in a piece of the podcast that we have since edited out. What else has happened for you this week, Sam?
Power cut at 4 a.m. No, that was fun. We've thankfully finished the mobile PWA for Podfans. So as of Monday, we will officially be a beta product.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yes. So the manifest is being uploaded as we speak today on Friday. And then over the weekend, we'll just do a little bit of checking. And then as of Monday, yes, we'll open the doors, remove the wait list. And it will be a full proper beta.
Excellent. Well, that'll be very exciting. Have you bumped into? I think this time last week, you were telling me all of the important people who you live next to and everything else. Is there anybody else in your village that we should know about?
Well, we're trying to get him out of the village now. Yes, Russell Brand lives in our village as well. And
you are joking.
No, I'm not. I've got Chris Evans, Chris Tarrant. I've got Ricky Gervais. And Russell Brand, So,
wow, I hope he kept his hands to himself.
No, my daughter.
Allegedly.
My daughters are now not going out. No, anyway. So Russell is persona non grata in the village at the moment, yes.
Yes, he denies all allegations.
Indeed, he does.
Which I should point out. He denied all of the allegations without actually knowing what the allegations were, which is always a good one.
But I would say, on a more serious note, and I'm sure that Adam will probably cover it on the Friday show, he's been cancelled basically off many platforms. And unless I'm wrong, the law used to be innocent until proven guilty. as opposed to guilty on social media and then deplatform?
Yes, I mean, he's been, he hasn't necessarily been deplatformed, but what's gone on is YouTube Music. So in case you don't know, he's a comedian in inverted commas in the UK, and he's been accused of a number of quite serious sexual allegations. My understanding is that YouTube has demonetized him, although Todd and Rob were very, or at least Rob was very keen in suggesting that he may have been demonetized because the advertisers didn't want to be advertising next to his content. So it might not have been YouTube actually making that decision. It might have been the advertisers who basically said, no, he's no longer brand safe. But in any case, he's been demonetized from his YouTube channel where he had 6-point-something million people. So that's quite a thing. A few shows have been taken off iPlayer and whatever the Channel 4 app is called these days. I think it's just called Channel 4, isn't it? But however it works. So a couple of episodes have been pulled off there. I know that the BBC have been sniffing around BBC News, which is journalistically independent from the rest of the BBC. I know that they've been sniffing around the podcast companies, wondering whether the podcast platforms are taking down Russell Brand content. So I have been helping them with their inquiries. But it's a very strange conversation. And as you say, he's not been convicted of anything. Although, I mean, the evidence is relatively strong, evidence which he denies, but nevertheless, and so you are there going, well, there is a limit, I think, in terms of how far you go. But I mean, I have to say, I was listening to the newsagents a couple of days ago, and they started with a clip of Russell Brand talking to Jimmy Savile. That was just a dreadful, dreadful thing. If you don't know who Jimmy Savile is, Wikipedia him. Don't. Yes, we're not going to go into that. But anyway, yes. So Russell Brand lives in your village. There's a thing.
Well, not for long.
He wasn't. He was supposed to be here in Australia in a week's time. Performing at a comedy festival, and he's been, I was going to say he's been cancelled. He and the festival have agreed that they will, that he will no longer be available on the festival. So yes, I think all of a sudden he won't be very busy for a bit.
Oh, well, I've got a lawn to cut. Maybe I'll ask him. Now, James, what's happened for you?
I've had a relatively quiet week. I have to tell you, it is sweltering here. It's early spring, but for some reason, we've got a heat wave right up the east coast of Australia. And so the temperature here went up to 33 today. So it's been a properly hot, humid Brisbane spring day. And I'm not quite ready for that. So, I had to get out the shorts and everything else. I know, imagine it.
I'm trying not to.
Down.
No.
Calm down.
You bring those to London, are you?
I certainly am not.
With your didgeridoo?
Well, I don't know actually, because I'm going to Greece straight afterwards. So who knows? Maybe I will. But yes, that was quite a thing. Yes. So that's been fun. But no, apart from that, just busy playing around with the RSS feed for the main Podnews daily podcast, just so that I can give people who are using Apple Podcasts a slightly different experience that looks as good as I can make it for that platform. And that's basically been all I've been doing this week.
Are we getting another show, another DJ show from you?
No, I don't think we're going to get another DJ show for some time. I did enjoy doing it, but yes. And I have to say, if I sounded that good when I was doing, so you'll find this show, it's called James's Random Music Show Thing, and you'll find it in any Podcasting 2.0 compliant app. And I have to say, if I sounded as good as that when I was actually doing a chart countdown and getting paid for it, then I'll probably still be doing it. But I got very lazy, so stopped doing all of that. And of course, we didn't have such a thing as the internet when I was actually on the air. And so being able to look up, the people who I was playing and find out more information about it was actually really hard. So, so people have it so easy, these
DJs don't know how good it is, do they?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that is it for this week.
Yes, you can give feedback to James and I by using email at weekly@podnews.net, or we prefer, send us a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support boosts, what are you using it for then? Then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Now, this time next week, we will, of course, have just finished Pod News Live. And I suppose the question is, are we actually going to have a show next week, Sam?
It depends if you're in Greece and I'm still on stage cleaning up after your mess. No, I don't know.
So there is a possibility that we do a slightly truncated version, maybe record that on Thursday morning. There is also a possibility that there may not be one, in which case we may see you back in 2 weeks. But we will see how we go. I think we are written down to do 50 shows a year, so perhaps this is one of our 2 weeks that we can take off. Who knows? Although there again, I'm sure that we can very quickly put something out. Our music, by the way, is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use Clean Feed for our main audio, and we're hosted and sponsored by Pod News Live and by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy. And we'll see you in London next week.
Indeed.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.